Okay. Hello all and welcome to our panel where we will be discussing who leads innovation, banking as a service or customer-facing fintechs. And over the last couple of years, and especially in the last few months, global pandemic withstanding, banking as a service companies have gained a larger footprint in the fintech world. And obviously with the introduction of PSD2 and open banking regulations in Europe, there is now the freedom for this innovative API-driven era to thrive, and it's opened up opportunities for countless new players. Now, on the other hand, banking as a service is now not limited to fintechs only. They're now working with bricks and mortar financial institutions too. Now, on top of the digital banks, various lending platforms and digital wallets, how can we mitigate this over-dependency on financial software companies? So, in this relationship, which side dictates the trends? Which side has more power? Now, for this panel, we have some brilliant speakers that are right at the forefront of this changing ecosystem. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves very briefly. And so firstly, I'm going to turn it over to the team who are over in Lithuania to start. Andrius, could you kick us off first, please?
Yeah. Could you hear me? So I'm Andrius Bagdonavičius. I have a few interesting roles in Mambu. So first of all, I am heading Lithuanian Technology Center, and also I am having a very interesting challenge leading a global team of platform and service reliability in Mambu.
Absolutely brilliant. And Erika, please.
So hi there. Thank you for having me. I'm Erika Maslauskaitė, Chief Business Development Officer at Inventi. We're the software development provider and SaaS product company for the fintech companies and payment providers based here in Lithuania and in partnership and partnering with the companies from Central Europe and Baltics.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much. And Andy, could I have you, please?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Fantastic to be joining you, albeit virtually today. My name's Andy Patton. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Contis. My background prior to joining Contis was that I've worked at American Express, MasterCard, and also for a startup accelerator based in Zurich. In terms of the role at Contis, I lead our sales team, our account development team, Lithuanian office in Vilnius, marketing and also client solutions. And Contis itself is an award-winning banking in a box or banking as a service provider, and works with some fantastic partners, including Paysera over in Vilnius.
Brilliant. So, and lastly, Benjamin.
Hello, and it's a pleasure to be joining you all as well. I am Benjamin Ensor. I'm Director of Research at 11FS. We are a consultancy. We believe that digital financial services is only 1% finished, and we're working with our clients to change the fabric of financial services by building the remaining 99%.
Absolutely excellent. And yeah, Andy, as you said, we're obviously, the three of us are joining digitally. It's the first time I've worn a suit in about 2 months, so it's slightly stretched. But I think the best way to start this panel is to kind of look at the kind of preamble, how it started. So if I could, Benjamin, could I direct this question towards you? How has the pandemic and the fact that we've had an ever-increasing amount of digital technology and a digital world, how's that contributed to the growth of the banking as a service industry?
The pandemic has obviously been a human disaster in so many ways. But if you're looking for silver lining in one of those silver linings has been how resilient digital technology has been, and how much the industry, not only the financial services industry, but also many other industries, have hugely accelerated in terms of adoption of digital. We've seen so many companies that were skeptical about people working from home suddenly realizing, oh, wow, it works. The technology works. It can be done. So you've seen a couple of things happen. Firstly, you've got executives who've been talking about digital suddenly being paid attention to. People who've been banging the drum for digital for years, suddenly the stuck in the muds are really listening to them. Then, of course, you've got pressure on established companies realizing, wow, we really need to think differently about our operations. We need to think about how we can cut costs, find faster, better ways of doing things. And that is creating a huge appetite to look at things in new ways and look at partnering with other companies, among other things, to build better, faster, cheaper services. And that's driving renewed or increased interest in banking as a service propositions.
Interesting. And Andy, if I could also get your input on that, do you think, do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think Benjamin's hit a lot of the high notes there. I think there's just been some really amazing transformations recently. I read a stat the other day that the average Briton has been cashless for the last 44 days, which, when you think about the structure of the economy, I think that is incredible. We know that there's been more e-commerce. That's been up 168%, no surprise there. But in terms of actual that extent of change, I think that's really been quite remarkable. I think that certain sectors will really see a lot of focus. We're thinking about some of those care-related sectors, supporting the vulnerable and those elements of society where there may be shielding. But I think it goes beyond that. I think that it will go into areas of the economy where they're looking at the ageing population and those sorts of people that require that service. And I think that actually the pandemic will act as an expediter of a lot of that focus.
Definitely, I can imagine. And I mean, this has been a challenge for a lot of companies across numerous verticals, retail especially, but it looks like financial services might have come out relatively unscathed. Andrius, could I ask you, typically before the pandemic, what were some of the main challenges that financial software companies were facing? And do you think the pandemic has changed that at all?
Yeah, so probably, thanks for the question. It's really interesting perspective, when the pandemic started, and I'm very much relating to what colleague Benjamin has said, is I am now typically asking a question, various executive guys, who are leading the digital transformation in your organization? Is it CIO? Is it CTO? And the most common answer which I get nowadays is COVID-19. So actually, what everybody has been planning many times before the pandemic was like a facilitator of all of those plans to be happen. Because, if we think like a human beings, our needs haven't changed. They haven't drifted away. It's and the services which we need to support our core human needs are still the same. It's maybe the channels and the way is transforming now, and as some people have say, it's probably might stay or be a new normal.
Interesting. And Erika, could I also get your input on that?
Yeah, indeed. Actually, I was referring to the meme that shifted over the internet. In terms of the who leaded the digital transformation, and of course COVID-19. And for us as business stakeholders and executives, it's a really crucial part to take a lead and actually enable our partners and clients and end-to-end customer to find the way how to use this financial disruption to get whether the financial support that they need in these challenging times, right? So for the fintechs, of course, the way of working, since the fintechs were always filling a gap for alternative payments, for better customer experience, for better UI, for tracking and analyzing the data, right? How do you use, what is your consumption of the things that you are buying online? So now it's shifted rapidly. And for us, I think in supporting the fintech industry, it's a really challenging thing to onboard the customer at the moment, since again, like the user base, we in most of the cases, fintechs were targeting the youngsters, so to say, the younger audience. These days, when everyone is like trying to secure the social distancing, many elderly people are in need of getting their purchases done. So, of course, for the banks and for the fintech companies, there is a need to reach to those kind of customers. And of course, tech engineering part, which was, as we know, banks like big corporate organizations, and they're struggling to being fast and effective, right? So for now, there is no time actually, to find like the key stakeholder, the key vendor to shift their business really rapidly, and they need the trustful partners, tech partners, to enable that digital presence really fast in terms of their business.
Interesting. And Erika, if I could actually follow up from that, do you think that this is going to, obviously we've just talked about how it's had a cultural shift and certainly a technological shift as people are more accepting of digital. And do you think this is going to change regulatory culture when it comes to maybe changing KYC or anything like that?
I'm more than sure, basically, like from the news that are now evolving and now being on top of the news section. So we see that most of the regulatory institutions, they're trying to find ways how to enable governments just to launch, let's say, the open banking solutions present in the countries, and at least 50% of the G20 countries are willing to enable open banking this year already. So I think that's a huge shift for the regulation in general. And Inventi, we're supporting the Fintechs here in Lithuania who are trying to obtain the specialized bank license or the EMI's license with the Central Bank of Lithuania. So we see the huge demand that they're trying to speed up the process for getting the license, and these software as a service products might enable the better and the faster shift for their business.
Interesting. Oh, brilliant. And I've got to ask, actually, now that we're having this, everyone's kind of segmented in their own homes, and it's kind of hard to build up those kind of friendships or partnerships and collaborations, which has become such a recent trend in this industry. Andy, could I get your viewpoint on this? Because I think your insight would be really interesting. What new collaborations and partnerships will be formed, and how will they be formed in the light of this upcoming economic crisis?
Sure. I think that partnerships can be difficult. There was some research recently put out by EFMA and Capgemini, whereby they said that 50% of fintechs didn't necessarily feel that they were in the right partnership. And I think that part of that is around the different cultures that exist maybe between a large company and a small company, differing focuses on agility and different focuses on maybe reputation and regulatory aspects, as an example. But I think what's happening at the moment, and what will really come out of the pandemic, is that the absolute sort of necessity for some of those innovations and for some of those partnerships to succeed, and also the impetus for speed. For example, at Contis, we developed, alongside Visa, a solution which was targeted at the National Health Service in the UK, being able to give carers who were buying products on behalf of those people who were shielding the vulnerable, to be able to do that safely. And I think that the sort of partnerships that we'll see, I alluded to it a little bit earlier on, will be around definitely that carer offering. I think that there'll be some really great examples of partnerships around that, and we're already seeing some ourselves as Contis. And I think also partnerships around liquidity, lending platforms, getting money into the hands of those businesses who are maybe coming out of furlough processes, or processes maybe where government, central or local, have supported them. So I think they're two key areas that will really see a lot of partnership orientated activity. And I think that because of the pandemic that actually the impetus to make a success of those partnerships will be even stronger.
Excellent. And Andrius, as Mambu, I would really like your input when it comes to collaborating. Can you give me a bit more input on that as well, in terms of how are these new kind of collaborations going to exist in this post-corona world?
Yeah, sure. I very much agree with what Andy has said on the topic. In our business is actually where we really trying to help traditional banking to be successful in digitalizing their offerings. We actually see a lot of potential. First of all, we see that traditional banks, they are built to last, not to change. Therefore, they are very much facing the challenge with the speed of change, the speed of provisioning new infrastructures, the speed of handling their vendors, so they can implement some new functionalities for their customers. And the second, what is very important, they are looking for the flexibilities, especially in this pandemic situation, where they need to start transforming their offerings to a fully digital space. And those flexibilities, those are incapability to be very flexible to utilize the capabilities of the ecosystem or choose a best-in-class solution which is provided in the ecosystem and integrated to the existing infrastructure. This is where actually banking as a service solution like Mambu chips in very well. So if you think that, in the traditional banking, in order to implement some of the changes, deliver some new functionality, it usually takes months. So in banking as a service, some functionalities can be delivered in weeks or sometimes even days.
Really interesting, excellent. And so, kind of following on to that new development of tech, and new products. When it comes to this new development, do you think it's been supply or demand driven? Benjamin, could I get your input on that, please?
Yeah, it's a great question. In a sense, it's both, because what really drives innovation is companies looking for new ways to create value for their customers. And so you have the companies, the brands, if you like, that own the customers or have the customer relationships, looking for new things that they can do. And then they're looking for partners who can enable things, who can help them do things faster. At the same time, you've got the capability providers, the software providers and so on, developing new, better ways of doing things. So in a sense, it's both the demand side and the supply side. It's when they come together that the magic really happens, because often innovation comes from the combination of existing capabilities, combining two things into one. So it's a bit hard to say it's one or the other, because it's actually both. It's the collaboration that creates the innovation often.
Interesting. And speaking of that collaboration, Erika, I know speaking, because obviously Lithuania, I know Inventi actually helped Revolut gain their banking license over there. And I was wondering, how much power do customer-facing fintechs like Revolut have over the creation of this new product capabilities?
So yeah, thank you for the question. Over a year now, we are collaborating with the Revolut Bank. So we successfully implemented the regulatory connector for them, so that they would comply with the specialized bank license. Implemented the integration with the tax authority organization. And the main thing and the main goal of theirs, why they chose the local vendor to implement the solution. So first thing, we had the defined software as a service product, which has the streamlined functionality and the time to market, the delivery time that they actually needed to comply with the regulation and with different stakeholders that were involved. So we're really happy having Revolut on board. For us as a small company, locally based here, it's a really big trust from the unicorn, fintech unicorn, who is actually shifting and disrupting the finance industry whatsoever. So also I can mention out of the partnerships, since we've mentioned those. So we are really happy to work with Mambu as well, and with the Mambu customers. So we were helping them also to enable the regulatory connectors if they're having and considering Mambu as a core banking platform.
Okay. And Andy, I've also got to ask, how much power do you think the customer-facing fintechs actually have? Or do you think it is actually driven from the banking-as-a-service companies?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a mix of both. When we think about the client-facing fintech, they're maniacally focused on solving a problem. They've got a very clear view of what that problem is that they're trying to solve. They're obviously, in many cases, very, very strongly focused on the UX that goes around the delivery of that, around the acquisition of similar customers that fall within that segment and sector. But when we think about the B2B providers, we have that perspective of looking across segments and sectors, which enables us to bring different lenses to the way that we can innovate. We also have strong visibility on the regulation and the trends and aspects that are coming in there. And I think that the mix of both of those is really where you get that sort of powerful, hugely potentially transformative partnership. And that's really what is exciting, I think, for everybody on this panel, is how you can bring the best of both worlds together, how you can provide a great platform for that fintech that's trying to innovate, great uptime, real-time, next-generation products around it, in innovations from the B2B provider, and equally facilitate those great innovations and those great transformations and disruptions that the fintech is seeking to do as well. So for me, again, it goes back to how do we really make successful partnerships in this space, cement them, make sure that they're working, and do away with those stats where 50% of people feel that the partnership isn't optimal. So if we can really get that firing on all cylinders, then that's when the end customer will really benefit.
Excellent. And speaking of that end customer, ultimately, they're the ones that need to be serviced with the newest technology. But do you think, Andy, that this is an industry which has been driven by consumer demand, or do you think it's research and development teams just coming up with all these new ideas that no one knew that they needed or wanted, and then just putting them in place?
No, I mean, I think that innovation is a change that can make money, is one of the definitions I've heard of the word. So, for me, coming up with change for its own sake and foisting it on a market, through an R&D department, I think we see less and less and less of that, to be honest. There were some stats that were published recently by the World Bank that there's 8 million underserved consumers in the UK and something like 24 million businesses across Europe who are underserved. So there's a door that's ajar there. There's a door that's open. There's a door that is ready for disruption, for people to come in with solutions and help improve the offering. And that isn't going to come around by people sitting in an ivory tower and sort of pontificating about what's going to work. It's about customer insights, customer research, being close to your end customers, working hand in glove with the regulators, working closely with the fintechs, and really looking to see about how and where you can transform and disrupt the market. And one of the sectors that we're focused on is Contis is insurance, for example. And we believe there's a lot of friction in the insurance space in terms of payments. And we think that there's some great areas that we could work together with the insurance companies for the benefit of the end consumer, be it around payment disbursements for claims and a whole host of other areas. So again, I think that increasingly, the innovations have to be relevant and can't be conjured up in isolation of the market realities.
Sure. And kind of following on from that, Andrius, could I get your perspective on this? As obviously in Lithuania, you've got a very young tech savvy population, and that's got to help massively with, for instance, R&D, but also demand. What have you seen in Lithuania when it comes to the public's interest into getting these new financial products?
Yeah. Thanks for the question. So, yeah, it's kind of an interesting perspective. Let it put it for a little bit away of the way we do the business in Mambu. Actually, what we do, we observe how tech-driven companies are working, like, I don't know, Airbnb, Uber, and similar companies. What they actually do, they innovate a lot, they try a lot, they leverage ecosystems. And actually, this is what we are trying to do and bring into the banking as a service business as well. So we are not facing the end customers, but what we do, we are enabling the financial organizations to serve their customers. And this is what our composable banking concept is all about. So it's about enabling the financial institutions to be ready and flexible for change, to do it in a fast manner, so they are adopting the customer needs very fast. Nobody knows how the user experience will look like in a year or two. So what we need to do in defining our businesses, we need to be settled for the right architectures, right APIs, which you can compose in an offering which customers needs in particular at that point in time. And actually, this was one of the reasons why Mambu has decided to bring their footprint into Lithuania to utilize this young, tech-savvy communities and knowledge which is here, so we can bring more and more of this innovation, more and more of tech-driven mindset to the banking business.
Interesting, brilliant. And we've discussed over the course of the panel the difference really between direct-to-consumer fintechs compared to B2B fintech players. But what I'm really interested in is how will that relationship change going into the future if the B2B ones are just providing all the services. So, Benjamin, could I please get your view on where do you think this ecosystem will go in the future?
Thank you, Doug. That's a great question. I think what we've seen a lot over the last few years, and what we'll continue to see, is quite a few of the direct-to-consumer fintechs pivoting to a business-to-business model, because it's really tough getting a consumer proposition or a small business proposition or even a large business proposition to market. Europe remains fairly fragmented, even if you're hugely successful in Poland. Equally successful in Czechia or Hungary or whatever is not easy. So many of the European direct-to-consumer startups are struggling to scale beyond one country. There are some wonderful exceptions like N26 and Revolut, but it's tough. So I think you'll see more of those businesses pivoting, particularly where they've got a really strong technology platform or they've got capabilities that they can give to others. At the same time, you're going to see digital giants coming in. We're already seeing companies like Uber, like Apple and so on, playing a bigger role in financial services precisely because of banking as a service. Banking as a service companies are making it easier for an Amazon or whoever to start offering services direct to consumers. If you look at small business, it's happening even faster as accounting platforms like Sage or Xero and so on start integrating huge numbers of capabilities from other companies and building whole ecosystems. So I think you're likely to see a lot of the consumer-focused and some of the small business-focused fintechs shifting their business model, pivoting because they're finding it too hard to win business. So you're going to see a growing number of B2B ones. Some of those will get acquired by existing businesses. So let's say someone like a Mambu is going to pick up a few other businesses that they see where there's great technology, great people, hasn't really got the scale. We're going to see a lot of consolidation on the business-to-business financial software side as companies pick up smaller firms that great tech, great people, but maybe struggling on the marketing side, struggling to really break through. So I think you'll see a lot of pivoting, a lot of consolidation over the next few years.
Interesting, very interesting. Well, thank you for that insight into the future. And I think that's all we've really got time for the original set of questions, and time to take a Q&A look. I've been getting a few throughout the panel. Unless anyone else has something they want to jump in on at the end of that in terms of the future of this ecosystem. No, okay, perfect. Right, well, so I've got a number of questions here. Do you think, with all this platformification and the barriers to entry being so much smaller, that they're going to give way to a much more niche set of services? Will people end up having their main bank and their bank on the side? Would anyone like to jump in on that? And I'm not afraid to...
I can start basically. I think, the status quo today, what we have now, we have like several cards and several banks and probably several fintech companies that we have already on board. So I think that this platformification, as they call it, is probably shifting towards like one marketplace, where you can buy everything, like buy and obtain different kinds of services on one platform. WeChat is one of the examples that's already like for years now in Asia, right? So Amazon jumping on board, whether Facebook jumping on board with Libra and the other examples, I think that's a way forward. And of course, niche, that's the gap where fintechs might actually fill in. And as we saw during this pandemics, right, like many fintechs would help and jump on board while helping to support the small SMEs and different businesses with the federal aid. And this was one of the examples how maybe banks were too slowly and fintechs jumped like on board. So I think that diversification and as diverse market we have, that helps to serve the right customer needs or the business needs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Very interesting. And Andy, sorry, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, just to add a couple of points to that. I think that obviously open banking is predicated on this very thing. It's how we can share data for the end consumer's benefit by enabling different products and services to be developed. But I think in terms of that true platformification, though, a lot of it will come down to the ability of us to port our identity, our digital identity between different entities as well. And I know there's been a lot of work done around that, some more successful than others. But in terms of that area, I think that will be really interesting. And there was a piece of work done by an investment company from the west coast of America called Andrius and Horowitz recently that said all companies will become fintechs. I think that might be a little bit of a stretch and an overstatement, but you do see with whether it's Uber, Airbnb, some of the mobile phone operators, some of the insurance companies that we work with, that wish to develop financial ecosystems, payment ecosystems. And I think that if we can get that identity aspect right and a safe porting of that identity between different companies, I think that that will aid that increase in developments of ecosystems.
Excellent. And that leads me actually onto my next question. If effectively every company is going to be a fintech company, does that ultimately mean that banking the unbanked will just become irrelevant because everyone will have to be connected to a bank in some way to use applications? How do you see fintechs leading innovation here in helping people finally becoming banked? Andrius, could I get your Benjamin? Sorry.
Yeah. So, yeah, I can tell. So my perspective, it's very simple here. What we can already observe is that many tech-driven companies already driving the user behavior another way. already today we have many services and companies delivering everything on the mobile phone, let's say. We don't know how the experience will change further, but what we for sure know that the user demand, due to those facts which technology-driven company is giving to us, and the way how we can enjoy other services, suggest that banking services should adopt as well. And if the traditional banking, if the old school banking will not be able to adopt or stay on par with these tech-driven companies, definitely they will not stay for a long time, right? So fintechs are here and definitely here to stay.
Yeah, I can imagine. And Benjamin, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, we spoke at the same time. I was just going to say, we've seen distribution costs falling massively over the past couple of decades. And as a result of that, millions and millions of people around the world have been brought into payment systems for the first time. That's going to continue to increase. But what's also happening is the ability to deliver better and better outcomes to customers through better customer experiences is continuing to increase as companies develop better technologies, better solutions. I don't actually believe that every company will become a fintech, but what we will see is financial services being embedded into more and more things, so that as we as consumers or businesses pursue particular outcomes, we have problems in our lives, companies are going to come up with creative, imaginative solutions that often involve payments or lending or deposits that enable us to do things more easily. So what we're going to see is financial services becoming embedded into more and more other services, so that we have to think about it less, so it becomes easier for us. Andy made a great point about insurance companies. You know, insurance companies are really trying to think hard about what's the asset that someone's trying to insure. They're trying to look after their home. They're trying to look after their car. So we can see all sorts of other companies like utilities and telcos and so on partnering with insurance companies to make it easier for us as consumers to manage that asset. So what's interesting is if you're a traditionally minded bank or insurance company or wealth manager, you just don't see this change in mindset as leading companies think about the ultimate customer outcome and build new services around that. So there's a huge shift coming, and some people understand it because they're close to customers and thinking about customers, and some people are carrying on in the same old way and they don't quite see what's happening.
Interesting. And I mean, with that, going back to almost the first question from the audience, and you brought it up slightly, Benjamin, talking about the tech providers. Do you think we're going to see them make more overt movements into financial services, or do you think they're pretty much, for instance, with the Google card and the Apple card, that's as far as they're going to go? Andy, could I get your view on that, please?
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to watch, isn't it? As you say, we've seen some steps. I think, given the customer data and therefore the insights that they have around their customers, I think they've been relatively modest steps thus far. And I wonder whether customers would feel that maybe it would be a step too far for some of those companies that have a huge amount of data about them to take on the mantle of being their provider of financial services in terms of their banking needs. The flip side of that, of course, is that they could do, a fantastic job driven by insights in terms of the products and services that would likely interest that individual based on the huge amount of insight that they have around the individual. But I think I just watched that one with a bit of interest to see how far an Amazon or a Google, Facebook, etc., might take that, and what the consumer receptiveness might be to that.
Interesting. And we've got... Oh, yes?
I think they'll take it as far as they can. I think this is going to come down to a battle between the European Union regulators and the big tech giants. If you look at China, you look at what Alipay is, you look at WeBank and so on, they will keep adding more and more and more. Look at Goldman Sachs partnering with Apple Goldman Sachs has got nothing to lose in the existing infrastructure. They're not an established bank not an established retail bank. They will power Apple as far as Apple wants to go. I think we're going to see a lot of digital giants pushing hard into financial services, and that's going to be a huge threat to established financial services companies.
Well, that will be a really interesting change in the industry. And kind of, I've got another crystal ball question from the audience. Erika, if I could point that your way, what do you think will be the most outstanding change in the financial industry from a customer's point of view in the next 5 years? That's a hard one.
I think that's a tough question, having in mind that a half a year ago, we wouldn't think that COVID might happen at all and would change dramatically and shift dramatically the industry that not only impacts the finance, but the general humanity. So I think the main thing that we might face is actually user identification, the user onboarding process. So having these cross platforms and different stakeholders and players on board, it's a really challenging thing to build a trust with the customer so that he would get the service using and so that he would verify himself. So I think the customer's ID thing, that's new thing that would shift not only financial industry, but all of the industries as follows, which are dedicated to our identification in general. And all of the fintech and tech companies are facing the challenge right at the moment, and many providers are having many different types of data that they try to, with the empowerment of the AI, try to modify and analyze. However, I think the main challenge is how do you build the trust with the customer so that he would have the right path to onboard to the service he might use.
Interesting. And Andrius, do you agree that it's going to be mainly a KYC issue going forward with all that data that all these companies will now have?
In some previous questions I have already mentioned, the 5 years period is something very big in tech world, given the fact everything is moving so rapidly, it's so hard to predict. And I think it would be a good wrap up for our discussion if we can tell that, the only thing which we are sure about that it will change, and what we have to take into the consideration is to prepare for those changes, which are definitely coming, which means we need to have flexible architectures so we can compose our future, whatever it comes.
Yeah, I mean, the only constant is change. And speaking about we've got just a time for one more quick one, I think. The change in data and identification. Benjamin, you brought it up earlier, the WeChats and over in China. That significant amount of data that they can pull on their customers is so much more colorful than maybe in Europe and America. Does that mean that, for instance, we're going to see in China and Hong Kong far more interesting financial services and products being created than the rest of the world in the next 5 years?
Not necessarily. I think there's so much we can learn from China, but there's a big difference in terms of the sort of information standards and privacy rights and so on. That it's a little bit of lessons for Europe from China, because there just aren't the same kind of protections that we have here. I do think we'll see a lot of innovation coming out of China. I think the Chinese companies have been hugely innovative. There's a vast amount to learn, but I'm not sure that we're going to follow the same path in Europe. That didn't quite answer your question. Sorry, I missed the question.
No, so the question was just with the sheer amount of colourful data that the Chinese government and Chinese fintech companies have, do you think there's a chance that Europe and America and Africa can never catch up when it comes to creating these brilliant new financial products that they might be able to create?
No, I think we can catch up.
Excellent. All right, guys. Well, I think that's all we have time for on the panel. Thank you very much for attending with me, and it was really insightful for me. And I'd like to say thank you to our audience and the questions, especially the tough one for the next 5 years. But Thank you very much. And to the panel, I mean, I don't suppose have you got any other inputs for the for any question that I might have skated over?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay, excellent. Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you very much for being on the panel with me, and I look forward to hopefully meeting you all outside of the virtual digital world that we live in.